in the interest of time, we'll get underway. So hello everyone, my name's Matthew Cleary, I'm the Regional Director of Urbis here in Victoria, and I'd like to welcome you to the first of our Mission Fit City events. Today's session, I would like to firstly acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay our respects to their leaders past, present and emerging. After a very long and protracted lockdown, some now 112 days to fight the COVID pandemic, Melbourne is emerging into COVID normal and hopefully not too far away, a COVID recovery. As a community, we now have two paths forward. The first will take us back to how things were pre-COVID. And yes, there's lots of things that we all miss and look forward to in our former lives. But likewise, we can also look forward to a different environment and what is a better environment to what we had pre-COVID. To get there, we're going to have to be really smart about how we go about our COVID recovery. At Urbis, we want to be part of that conversation, and our Mission Fit Cities research is just one part of the contribution to this dialogue. In a moment, you'll be hearing from Kate Merrick, Director of our Future State business, where Kate will start to unpack some of these key themes based on our Mission Fit Cities research. Following, we will hear from our panel of civic leaders, including Leanne Dalziel, the Mayor of Christchurch in New Zealand, Sally Capp, our Lord Mayor here in Melbourne, and given the events in Madrid, unfortunately, Begonia won't be able to join us, but Santiago Soro, Councillor for International Affairs and Cooperation, is joining us to share his insights and learnings from Madrid and Europe. A few quick housekeeping matters for today's presentation. Whilst we're going through the presentation, we'll have the chat function open in Zoom. Please feel free to put any comments or questions in there. Through the presentation, Nathan Stribley, our colleague, will manage the chat function and provide answers to any questions that you may have. And if time permits, towards the end, Nathan will also collect some key questions and themes that we can ask of our panellists. We hope that you find today's session informative, thought-provoking, and importantly, that it instills some confidence and further optimism about the future. And it gives you some ideas that we can collectively harness to deliver a better post-COVID state. Thank you again for joining us. And I'd like to introduce Kate Merrick for the Mission Fit Cities presentation. Kate.
Sorry, it looks like we had a bit of technical difficulty there, so I'm not sure how much of that you caught. I might start again and just say thank you so much, Matthew, and good afternoon, everybody, and definitely good morning if you're joining us from Madrid, where it's just after 6:30 a.m. Today, cities are experiencing some of the greatest social, economic and environmental challenges. It's really easy to feel quite disheartened about their future, but I think it's also very important that we remember that courageous, creative, charismatic and sometimes charming, they're also the founders of our boldest solutions. And the simple truth is that in the future, cities will matter more than ever, but not all cities will succeed equally. The great human migration is undeniable. By 2050, in the with COVID world, about 70% of our population will live in cities and approaching 80% of global GDP will be created there. At the same time, it'll also be cities' responsibility for 2/3 of our global energy budget and about 70% of our greenhouse gases. In some of our cities here in Australia, where we've got an aging population and a declining productivity per capita, this threatens our ability to maintain the very lifestyle that we currently enjoy into our future. And this must be regarded as a call to arms. So the Urbis team has been creating a piece of future-oriented research exploring what will underpin success for the next generation of Australian cities through our research program, Mission Fit Cities. From this work, we've developed a predictive framework with an actionable scorecard intended to form much more intentional long-range decision-making. We're helping to focus policy and investment today in the areas where it will matter most to future generations. But first, a very quick word about the framework itself and what we were actually trying to measure. As you can see from the slide on the screen, it's got 6 key domains or platform areas, and these have been drawn from the themes that our Generation 6 city research told us would be important about city success in the future. Each of these domains has a series of indicators, and collectively these indicators are measured by a set of 51 independent variables. Currently, we've created mission fit scorecards for about 15 cities in Australia and a comparator set of around 6 cities internationally. Today, we've only got time to explore a few, and of course, we're going to focus on Melbourne, but we're going to put that in the context of our ability to understand domestic cities, but also to look more broadly at 4 or 5 of our competitor set. And we've been able to include Madrid because fortuitously, this is one of the cities that we had already studied. But before we get to that mission fit scorecard and the big drum roll at the end that shows us how well Melbourne has done, I think it's important that we unpack each of these subject domains individually and see how Melbourne is performing. Let's go first to people. So the people scorecard, as you can see there, Melbourne is the slightly darker blue at the top, scoring 7.5. It's absolutely fundamental, the lifeblood to any city. Melbourne has benefited from very strong population growth and has a diverse metropolitan community with a terrific creative and knowledge-based cohort. Whilst educational attainment itself is quite high, it would be great to see a few more graduates coming through with STEM degrees because this is going to be very important to our future growth. On another matter, quality affordable housing and housing choice presents a significant challenge in the city at the moment because housing stress is threatening to talent attraction, to inclusion, to well-being right across the metropolitan area. I'd like to see in the future a stronger focus on social resilience and well-being playing out because this is so important to reducing the amount of vulnerable cohorts we've got across our community, encouraging social capital and rebuilding our community spirit. Let's move on now and have a look at the Planet scorecard. Obviously, the Planet score is looking at resilience of natural systems and their ability to support our ongoing urban life. Concerningly, this is actually one of the weakest scores across all of our 6 domains for all of the cities that we've studied. And you can see there that Melbourne actually does very well with a score of 7.5. Metro Melbourne is building this score of its great investment in renewable energy per capita, and it also performs really well in terms of journey to work not using your car. In fact, this sustained investment in infrastructure of public transport particularly has been the backbone of this environmental score and will continue to be so in the future, with Melbourne Metro coming online pretty soon. But moving forward again, I'd like to see a little bit more emphasis on air quality and also a bit more emphasis on urban tree canopy and urban cooling in order to make sure that we're able to maintain in our CBD a quality of environment that's great for our individual well-being as well as being attractive. You might actually note there that this was the lowest score that Singapore, usually understood to be the poster child in mission fit terms, scored. However, as we look at some of their future policy areas and areas of investment, we would anticipate that that 6, more or less the lowest score, will transition to about an 8.5 within 5 years, really highlighting the idea that if we make an investment today, we're going to see an ongoing return within the 3 to 5 year horizon and an exponential return within a 10-year horizon. We might move now to performance. And when we're thinking about the performance score here, we can see that Melbourne is kind of sitting in the middle at a score of 7.5, which means that it's performing relatively well against its domestic competitor set, but maybe a little bit of work to do against some of its international comparisons, particularly London and Singapore. A growing advanced manufacturing base and an innovation sector that's starting to gather its global reputation will be the new foundations of the economic growth in Melbourne for the future, provided that we can continue to foster, to retain and to attract a talent base. So working closely with our powerful universities to make sure that we're able to reintroduce international students into our CBD as soon as possible is incredibly important for our future talent ecosystem. I'd like to see a little bit more love and attention paid to our spin-off, startup and scale-up enterprises as they bounce back to ensure that they thrive in the post-COVID world. This is going to be an incredibly important investment in the future performance of the economy for Melbourne, and something we can do today that will also increase the vitality of our CBD area. Let's think a little bit about confidence. So positivity, because I like alliteration, we move to the term positivity, but it really captures all the different ways in which we know that a city has built its self-confidence. And here we've got excellent news for Melbourne with a score of 9.5 actually coming out on top of all of the local and the international comparison set. I think it's also quite interesting when we start to look at Madrid, what the story around the confidence of the city had started to say before the unfortunate circumstances of COVID kicked in. And the most important thing for cities like Madrid and Melbourne to realise is that a strong performance against all of these indicators going into COVID, the suite of green lights that cities like Melbourne and Madrid both had, all of those strengths are still going to be there for us to leverage as we come out. The great university sector, the strong city brand, the destinational CBD, the depth of visitor opportunity, and the engaged community, both business and residential, are there for us to leverage. You went into this, Melbourne, as one of the leading next generation cities for good reason, and working collectively to reignite citizen, business and visitor confidence, you will emerge even more charismatically, definitely building back better. Let's just move to have a look at power. And again, another synonym. So power this time meaning governance, if you like. And of course, because cities come in all shapes and sizes, this is one of those domain areas where there's a great deal of variation in the score. Stability, collective governance, long-range vision and bold thinking about the future are absolutely critical to the long-range success of cities. Melbourne has performed really well in this domain, and I was quite pleased that against the poster child again of Singapore, Melbourne's score of 8.5 is really very respectable and something that we can build on, which means if we hold it together now, we are extremely powerfully positioned for future success. If we continue to share that can-do and how can we mentality that's characterised our with COVID lockdown period, this will be absolutely critical to maintaining a high trust equilibrium and a strong future focus. But perhaps closest to my heart is place, because place plays such an important mediating role in the human experience. It's critical to our quality of life, our ability to build an inclusive city, to attract talent, and to ensure that knowledge transfer happens rapidly. And yet again, this is a place where Melbourne is playing to its obvious strengths, and, quite fortuitously, so is Madrid. Clearly, we want to end on this significant competitive advantage for you. And strong and important to this, in fact, fundamental or foundational, is the strength of the CBD and the role that it plays as an asset for the whole of the metropolitan area. Scoring highly on cultural vitality and creative energy, with a very distinctive sense of place and streetscape, the City of Melbourne is really well set to leverage the future place dividend that it's created by precinct-led renewal projects. In short, this is a very special city which has worked extremely hard to create a powerful and distinctive identity based on the dynamism of its urban experience. So I know that there's usually a really big drum roll here that comes ahead of actually putting the scorecards up. But if we flick to the scorecards now, how did Melbourne fare and how confident can we feel as we start to emerge from this shock to our city system? Well, as you can see, when we think about this among the jury of our peers, Melbourne was in fact first among equals and by a fairly significant measure. Although I'm quite happy to say as a proud Brisbaneite, we came a not so close second. So with a score of 8.2, you're really holding your own. But cities, just like people, are extremely competitive. So I thought it might be interesting if we now integrated the scores of our international and our domestic competitor sets. So if you wouldn't mind turning to the next slide, we can see that actually, when we think about this in the sense of all the cities within our set today, Melbourne is still holding its own with a score of 8.2 against the score of 8.5 for Singapore. And if we drop down not that far below with an aggregated score of 7.9, Madrid is looking pretty lively too, coming in just behind my former home city of London. And I think what these scores tell us, even down to 7.1 for Perth, is that the cities within Australia are extremely well placed to be next generation cities. And if we're able to build some actionable insight coming out of this exercise, we're really well placed to command a happy, livable, prosperous and competitive future. But a few tips maybe of things that we might like to focus on from the context of Melbourne itself. We've got some very big decisions to make about the kind of city we would like our children to live in. Maybe a few things that we could focus on would include how we ensure that we nurture and enhance the culture and the creativity that we're so well known for and that underpins our brand presence as we move out of this lockdown time. How can we build greater momentum around our startups and our scale-ups and strengthen our innovation ecology? This gives us a lot of opportunity to build early momentum and energy in the CBD. How could we put ourselves into a nation-leading position around CBD affordable homes and build on the work that's already been done with the homeless or the at-risk during the COVID lockdown period? And finally, how do we make sure that we actually bank all this trust equilibrium that we've built up for ourselves and create a coalition of confidence through the aligned cross-sectoral city leadership? So, It's very easy to get caught up into the moment. This has been a time that's been an extreme shock to the systems of our city. And we can forget sometimes that we can learn powerful lessons from 9,000 years of city shaping. At different points in their history, every city succeeds beyond their aspirations. Then they face challenges, they pivot, and they re-emerge with a proposition that's stronger. And this is one of those moments, not just for Melbourne, but for every city. It's the point at which we get to pause and rethink what we want for our future. And those cities that make bold decisions today will be the leaders of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Great presentation and some great insights there. We're now going to, as Kate said, we've had 9,000 years of cities to learn our way through this, but we've now got an opportunity to hear from three really significant civic leaders in their own rights and through our panel. So it's with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Leanne, Sally and Santiago to the panel. And I'm just going to start off with Leanne. So our first theme, we've themed our comments around, or our section now around the first one being confidence and governance. And obviously, you know, Christchurch, and the reason we wanted Christchurch to come along and talk to us today is obviously through the earthquakes of 10 years ago now, Christchurch, whilst it was a different crisis, had to rebuild itself and reimagine itself coming out of those crises. And we're just really interested to hear from you about how Christchurch and the community and the government actually went about organising itself to start reimagining and start having that discussion about what Christchurch was going to be and what they wanted it to be in the future.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to say a few words today. I was really pleased to receive the invitation because one of the experiences that I had after the events here in Christchurch back in 2010, 2011, was that I had the opportunity to go to a conference in Brisbane. And while I was there, I called in to see the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. And they were amazing. They just opened their doors. They shared their lessons that they had learned. But they also shared something I thought even more important, and that was that they had learnt many lessons from what had happened in Victoria with the Victoria bushfires. And so I felt that I was getting the benefit of the experience of two other jurisdictions just with the one visit. And what I felt was that people that have been through experiences are very, very happy and willing to share those experiences so that others perhaps can learn from those lessons and avoid some of the pitfalls. And there are always pitfalls. We never get it perfectly right. So my first sort of tribute really is that you can learn lessons from others, and I love the fact that Melbourne's reached out to other cities to participate in this event today. The second one is that you do need to identify what your strengths are. You've already mentioned in the presentation about the importance of building on your strengths, and that's been very much the focus of the presentation. But at the same time, you don't want to reinstate the weaknesses that exist as well. So I think it does demonstrate that, well, what's happened in Christchurch has demonstrated an opportunity to address some of the weaknesses. And that doesn't just mean building back better buildings and the infrastructure. It actually means building a better economy. It means building a better society, a better way to live, a better environment. So all of those factors come to play. And then taking the community on a journey that it truly engages them in meaningful exchange. I guess that's the third leg of the treble.
So with that exchange that you talk about, was that key to building community confidence? And what was the recovery phase for you? What did you do when confidence started to wane?
Oh, well, can I just explain just one quick thing about the community engagement right at the very start? We were in a legislative framework, so central government did put in place a legislative framework, but that asked the Christchurch City Council to be responsible. And I was a member of Parliament at the time. I wasn't the mayor at the time. And it was the council was asked to lead a process of developing a draft central city recovery plan. So it was focusing everyone's attention on the central city. And the central city, it's the same as what I'm hearing with respect to Melbourne, is that it wasn't just Christchurch as in its area, but actually our two neighbouring districts, Greater Christchurch as we would describe it, they were very much a part of being engaged in this consideration of what the future of the central city would look like. It's their town too, it's their centre of town as well. And so that process, one weekend, it was called Share an Idea. 10,000 people turned up over the course of a weekend just to do what it says, share an idea, share their ideas about what they wanted for the future of their city. And from that emerged a really powerful picture of the kind of sustainable city, a more green city, a more pedestrian and cycling friendly city. All of those elements emerged from it. So in terms of confidence, I think that really felt as if people were going to have a real say over what the future of their city would be.
Fantastic idea. Thanks, Leanne. I'm now going to go to Santiago in Madrid. Santiago, before we started the call, you were talking to the immediate COVID response, and you talked with a lot of positivity and confidence in your voice about the approach that was being undertaken and the results that were being had in Madrid. Can you talk about how you've maintained the confidence of the population of Madrid and how they're feeling through the current pandemic and how you're keeping their spirits up and keeping them motivated about the future?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. In fact, as you say, we have been going through a difficult year in Madrid, as in many other cities. We went through a lockdown with home confinement for 2-3 months earlier this year. That was necessary to bend the curve and to have the hardest peak of the pandemic. And at that time, solidarity and support from citizens was very large, very important to as a whole city system overcome this difficult situation and bring all that positivity that you mentioned in the hardest time to the top of our citizen contributions to the city in these difficult times. We cannot forget, however, that this pandemic had also a strong economic and social effects. So we have now more than 3 times the number of people that is being supported by social services directly, especially those that are the weakest, that didn't have savings to cope with 1 or several months of low income or no income in some cases. And we see that the impact in the social equality system is large, and we have increased all that we can, the largest increase in the history of Madrid in the social staff and in the social resources for economic subsidies, for even food and basic product supply, or for any other types of resources to cope with this change, so that nobody is left behind and they can feel the support of the society and of the Madrid City Council. Now that we face this second wave of the pandemic, this is different also, first of all, because the numbers are not as high as they were in the first wave. Also, the evolution is more gradual. So we have learned a few important things over the months. And now I think we are in a position to take more fine-tuned responses, knowing which are the most the riskier activities in terms of contagion and which are not. And so, for example, we have started to apply nighttime curfew, so restriction to movement. Everybody should stay home during the night to avoid these social gatherings where relaxation of measures is more typically happening. And we are promoting outdoor activities of all kinds from a cultural and also from an economic point of view. For example, we have allowed more than 250 bars and restaurants in the city are now authorized to use space that was previously used for street parking and now is used for outdoor terraces and dining, so that these bars, restaurants, and other economic activities can cope with these difficult moments and go through and continue thriving in the city after this more difficult period passes, hopefully in short time.
Your strategy, Santiago, about allowing restaurants to trade out onto footpaths will be absolute music to Sally Capp's ears, because we're about to embark on the same strategy here in Melbourne. So Sally, turning to you, obviously there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of debate around our governance here in Victoria over the past period with the problems that we had at the start of the pandemic. Thankfully now we've overcome them. I'd really like to get your thoughts on the confidence issue though for Victoria. So what we've seen in our other cities in Australia, there's been a real issue with building confidence and getting people back into our cities and active in our central activities areas again. You know, it's going to be a big task for us going forward to get that happening in Melbourne. How do you see that rolling out for Melbourne? And what do you think are going to be the key levers in building confidence in the central activities area again?
Great, Matt. Well, lovely to be here. Thanks for having me, and just already written notes from Leanne and Santiago, so thank you. And a great report. Can't wait to see the detail. I think this sense of confidence is something that's been in sharp relief throughout COVID here in Melbourne and other cities, obviously. What was really interesting at the start of particularly this second lockdown is as a level of government very quickly identifying what are we responsible for as a local government and how are we interacting with other levels of government to continue delivering essential services, because it is the delivery and the ongoing provision of those essential services that creates that base case of confidence and trust. And from there, we can start looking at other initiatives and projects. So, for example, we still need to make sure that the rubbish is collected every day, that people relying on meal services or other social services receive that support daily. It's so important that the city's essential functions continued. And that took up a really big part of our first response to COVID and to lockdown, was to make sure that we understood our role and what was essential, and that we had the resources and the focus to ensure that we continued to deliver those services. And we have done that well. And it's been a combination of factors, including a very flexible and motivated workforce to ensure that we've continued to do that. That has then set us up for other initiatives, such as ongoing support through business grants or hardship programs, and then into our activities around the reactivation and recovery of our city. As you know, our city opens at 11:59 this evening. It's so exciting. The relief and the sense of release, literally, for us to move out of lockdown is monumental. The emotion I've seen on our streets today as people prepare is enormous. And I know that 11:59, I will be sitting in a bar in Melbourne, leading by example as we show that confidence in our city and that support for our businesses. And I'm not joking, because a big part of confidence is not just leading by example, but showing people that they can feel confident about that return to a city centre. We've been disproportionately impacted as a city economy that's so reliant on people, big numbers of people coming together, that it's, from our perspective, things that seem relatively simple, like making sure that our city is COVID clean, about making sure that good transport options are in place, about making sure we're working with major employers to reassure their workers that through their efforts, our efforts, state government efforts, people can feel confident about that journey into the way they move around the city and the way they'll interact in their workplaces. It's really going back to those basics and those essential elements to everybody's day, and making sure that we can deliver on those well as being able to walk into a shop or a cafe, restaurant and pub and feel that same level of confidence about their interactions. So much of this COVID has been about the physical elements and what that has then caused in terms of infections, economic hardship, mental anguish, etc. We need to make sure those physical environments and our interactions build confidence rather than undermine confidence, and that's where we're starting.
Terrific, Sally. Thank you for that. That's great insights. And look, I agree. I actually had to come into the office this afternoon for today's event because I didn't trust my home internet, and just that little bit of energy already you can see. And you know, as I walked from the car park to the office, even though people had their masks on, they were smiling with their eyes. and you could really start to feel the positivity growing. I want to move on now. So I want to sort of start to, I think we've covered off a little bit of the culture, but I want to sort of focus in on a little bit of the commercial elements of cities. And Santiago, if I can come back to you, Madrid is obviously, you know, a major cultural hub for Spain and a global cultural hub, but it's also a very, very important commercial hub in the context of Europe in particular and in terms of Spain. What do you see as the big issues in terms of driving investment, driving confidence from major corporations and investors into the future? And obviously with your role where you have to reach out to other countries and build relationships and so forth, what are you focusing on in Madrid to drive that broader confidence from outside of Madrid and outside of Spain?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. I think this is critical for Madrid, for the strategy in Madrid, and for the mid-term and long-term recovery and attraction of innovation and economic activity to the city. We have been through the years quite active in this direction. I mean, we have developed business incubators. We have reduced and we are reducing red tape burden also, and we are trying to attract as much business as possible to the city in collaboration with business associations and economic sectors that drive and can improve our prosperity. But regarding the broader picture, I think there are two important things to consider. First, the economic investment, which Madrid has concentrated most of the foreign investment in Spain, needs, let's say, confidence and needs certainty on what is going to happen in the city in the next years. For this reason, and because of the impact of the coronavirus, in Madrid, the 5 political parties, including government and opposition parties, have come together to agree, to discuss and agree. We have agreed a set of 350 measures, many of them related to economy, to commerce, that have been agreed by unanimity. So how to act in the aftermath, in the short, mid and long term, because we want this agreement to drive the city recovery and transformation, not just in this political mandate, but in the longer run as well. And in this transformation, we are trying to build the confidence, also aligning our strategies and responses with the SDG strategy in Madrid, the strategy for the Sustainable Development Goals, which will be the roadmap for our city from here to 2030. And also putting a lot of emphasis in sustainability, in accelerating the transition, the energy transition, the transition to climate neutrality. And we are doing this aligned with the European Green Deal and also with the recovery funds that Madrid is expecting to get in this recovery effort from the European Union, that will put a significant impetus on this direction that we have already drawn in Madrid.
How do you feel that that's positioning you from a competitive position with the other major cities of Western Europe? Do you feel as though it's having a real impact, or is it too early to tell?
Well, throughout these late years, Madrid has been the city of Spain that has attracted more than half of the total foreign investment in Madrid. So we have taken a leap in Spain, sorry. So most of the foreign investment in Spain has come to Madrid. We are taking a very proactive and liberal view to attract business to our city. And of course, the impact of COVID is complex at the moment, but I'm sure we will overcome it. And as you say, we are competing with many other cities for this investment. But Madrid has some key features that are important for these investments to come, which is this red tape burden reduction, this support from the city council to all.
I think we may have just lost Santiago there. Sorry, Santiago,
Sorry, I think I lost connection. I was saying that. Sorry, Matthew, can you remind me where I was when I lost contact?
Just the last sentence. But look, I'll break Santiago, because we will run out of time. I'll come back to you on some other issues. Leanne, I'd like to come back to you and talk about Christchurch. Obviously, post the earthquakes, now going back 10 years, Christchurch obviously had a very big hurdle to overcome in terms of encouraging investment back in the city, and indeed just getting the local community prepared to reinvest in their city. how did you go about instilling the confidence, and what mechanisms did you put in place, and what promotions did you put in place to drive that confidence to get the investment back into Christchurch?
Well, first of all, I mean, as I said before, I wasn't the mayor at the time. I was an opposition member of parliament, so wasn't in a position of influence either. But what I will say is that what central government did was to announce that they wanted to make a plan, a blueprint really for the redevelopment of the central city that would demonstrate the confidence coming from the public sector in order to attract private sector investment. So if the government was confident, the council was confident, then that would actually instill business confidence as well. And I mean, I guess ironically, the private sector certainly came to the party in response to that, and in fact demonstrated its level of commitment before some of the government and council projects even got off the ground. So it was a very challenging ask for a small city but with significant government backing. We are getting there. But it certainly has meant that there has been a lot of investment made in the city when perhaps in other circumstances we would have seen value leave the city and the investment proposition not really stack up. So it was a very good way of leading us into the recovery period. And I think post-COVID-19 though, because obviously we face the same challenges as everyone else. But I guess the benefit of our experience is that we now know the significance and importance of partnerships and relationships with others. And we have reached out to our neighbouring districts, to central government, to iwi, our local Māori tribal connections, and seeking a sort of collective response to plan for the future. So Greater Christchurch 2050 is now being developed and consulted on across the Greater Christchurch area. And I think what I'm hearing from the discussion before, that this isn't about the Council of Melbourne on its own. It's actually about the connection between all of the councils and what collectively you can bring to the table in order to develop a post-COVID recovery. And it's more than a recovery. So we're defining ours as a repositioning. We've done recovery. It's repositioning the city for the future, and that's what I'm hearing that you're talking about as well.
Thanks, Leanne. Sally Cap, we've got 3 layers of government here in Victoria, with our state government, the federal government, of course, and then our local municipalities. Do you think from the government perspective we're showing enough confidence, we're showing enough leadership, we're showing enough optimism for the future yet? And what do we need to do with our local levels of government and the state government in particular to really drive that confidence and optimism that Santiago and Leanne have spoken to?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's no doubt, I think Leanne said that private sector will be looking to see what government is doing and looking for that confidence and the signals and levers that we're using to encourage investment, to encourage those long-term views about a future in Melbourne. I know that more recently, certainly as the lockdown went on, there's been a little bit more of the politics playing out in some of the day-to-day discussions, but I can assure everybody that the levels of cooperation that we've had during COVID have really gone to a new benchmark in terms of the 3 levels of government, and that's something that we do not want to go back from. We need to keep pushing forward. We've had some terrific examples. The $100 million City Recovery Fund for the City of Melbourne in terms of reactivation is a joint effort between state and local government. It's the biggest fund of its kind. We've had to to invest in the city. We've got efforts like, I call it the City of Yes, I think, for us to recover, but also reposition and make sure we continue to attract our fair share of investment and business interest going forward. We have to be able to show that we are willing to look at our own systems and processes and move through that red tape. There can't be barriers at the moment unless they're reasonable. For example, design quality is still important, but we do want to see those approvals for big projects that can create economic stimulus and long-term legacies going through. So we are really reorganising ourselves around a City of Yes. We've been doing that also with state government. We're talking with our federal government about direct investments into our economy, which would be unprecedented in terms of federal working directly with a capital city council, and we're really pleased about that. And then on the ground, even during lockdown, our Cleaning the City program was a joint venture. Our Greening the City program and 150,000 new trees and plants around the city was a joint venture with state government. Flash Forward, which is recreating 40 of our laneways to really build on our street art cred and delight people as they come back, is a JV as well. So it is that sense of confidence, one, about us working together, and two, we are making massive investments with our own resources and in redeploying our resources so that we can be a City of Yes to welcome investment into the future.
Terrific. Sounds good by me. Now, I'd like to take a slightly different tack. So I'd like to bring in a guest, Claire Spencer. Claire is the CEO of the Arts Centre here in Melbourne. And the Arts Centre underpins one of our most iconic precincts, a really important precinct for the city. Claire, a question to you, and then we'll get the panel to respond. The arts sector has been one of the hardest hit sectors during the pandemic, and obviously being being significantly hampered through that period. It's a critical part to our city. It drives our vibrancy, it drives our identity, and really importantly, it is a huge economic driver for our city. How do you see the arts sector recovering, and how do you think we need to start thinking about the arts sector as part of the repositioning of our economic vitality going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I love some of the themes that have come out from some of the other speakers about building on the assets that you already have and really leveraging those. And I think we're so blessed in Melbourne. We have such great creative infrastructure already that's making such a significant contribution to the city. But I think that value of culture and creativity now forms a really critical part of Melbourne's recovery. We have the people, we have the assets, we have the audiences, and we absolutely have the appetite, I think, as a sector to play this role. And there are choices, you know. I'd love to say I was going to be in a theatre tonight at 11:59. We're a little bit behind the bars, but as soon as we are able, we will be opening. And I love this idea of City of Yes. And I think one other thing I would just say is that people in the creative industries, by their very nature, are creative and courageous, but we're also determined, tenacious, strategic, and ferocious collaborators. So I really do think we have an important role to play here in both signalling hope and optimism for the city and the broader community, but also providing experiences that draw people out of their homes in a way that they feel really safe. And what we've heard from Victorians through this time is that they are desperate to see live performance again. It's so much part of the fabric of our city, and we think it's a key mechanism to draw people out of their homes, to rebuild that sense of confidence that we can return to some kind of normal. And whilst we're not exactly in the CBD already. We're a stone's throw from it. So our experiences will have a role in enlivening and invigorating our city and communities again. And this symbol of hope, I don't think we can underestimate that hope and optimism that we're going to have a connected community again. I think, you know, we've all had enough of isolation and we want more than just streamed digital content. So now is the time to sort of play our part in Melbourne's recovery, recognising that it's the engine room of the state. Of course, we have to do it safely, and large gatherings are under immense scrutiny at the moment, but that's our core business. That's what we do. And yes, of course, we're having to pivot and change as to how we do that in a COVID safe way. But we've got some amazing assets to work with. And, you know, for Arts Centre Melbourne in particular, we've got the best outdoor venue in the country in the Sydney Mire Music Bowl, and many other spaces around the Arts Precinct and by the river. And that's where we're looking to really animate the city. Is in those outdoor spaces primarily. We're very blessed. We're going into summer right now. So that's what we can expect to see, a real sort of enlivening of those outdoor spaces. But I do think it's important not just to think about the immediate reopening period. And I was very interested to hear from Leanne in Christchurch on this. I think for us, it's about, we've got to think in the medium to long term as well, not just about that reopening period. And how can we open up our arts infrastructure? How can we continue to democratise arts and culture in the way that Melbourne does so well? And, you know, for us, I'm anticipating that there'll be some fairly significant infrastructure reimagining over this period to support us in doing that. So it's an exciting time. It's, you know, I think we all go into this with a little bit of trepidation, but an enormous optimism now. And I was just talking to my amazing Arts Centre Melbourne team earlier today, and they're all chomping at the bit to get back to work and to play their part in reanimating the city. We feel now, in a way, we're so much more than just a performing arts centre. We feel like we're actually part of the city's recovery. And that's an important role for us to play, and one which we relish, absolutely.
Terrific. Thank you for that, Claire. Santiago, in Madrid, obviously Madrid is a great city of art and architecture. How has Madrid tackled this issue of, you know, invigorating what the real fabric of our cities is and the vibrancy that comes from the arts, culture and so forth? And how do you look forward to that into the future, and how will you leverage that in Madrid in the future?
Yeah, well, indeed, the situation of the cultural and art sector is very hard at the moment because of the decrease in the number of visitors, tourists, and even the local population is not attending as much as it did to this type of activities. So what we're doing at the moment is, first of all, apply tax reduction, rebates and fee exemptions to all these cultural sectors, so that they can compensate in part for this reduction in activity and in income during this period. And also, we are programming cultural performances in outdoor spaces throughout the city, throughout the districts of the city, so that we can support this cultural fabric. And at the same time, in the longer run, we need a full city recovery, building in confidence to attract back visitors from Spain, tourists from abroad, and all this set of lively entire set of city that can really bring back all the number of attendees to these cultural sectors that we need. So we are, let's say, trying to help to survive through this period to all our cultural activities and assets, so that they are in full preparation for the next month, hopefully next year, when we are back to normality and they can self-sustain and continue running as they were doing in the past by themselves.
Thanks, Santiago. I'd now like to bring Anna Peters into the discussion. Anna's the Director of the Institute of Health Transformation at Deakin University, and she's a Professor of Epidemiology and Equity in Public Health, and is a very good friend of mine that we spend lots of Friday nights together watching our kids play cricket. But Anna, in the work you do, we know that, you know, post-recessions, post-economic events, that the disadvantaged in the community often struggle to make that next step. They miss out on opportunities, economic opportunities, they miss out on opportunities for full-time work and advancement and so forth. This time around, we're going to have a whole cohort of people that have to deal with the economic crisis, but also with the pandemic itself and the health issues that come from that. From a policy setting, what are people and policymakers going to have in mind as we come through and into this COVID recovery to make sure that we don't end up with a generation and a large cohort of our community that gets left behind because of the difficulties that we're going to obviously face over the next year or two?
Thanks very much, Matt. First, I'd like to say thanks a lot for introducing this health and wellbeing angle to the discussion. As the director of Deakin's Institute for Health Transformation, we work all the time with our partners to develop evidence-informed policy and practice that really aims to enhance health and wellbeing for all Australians. So your invitation was a bit of a true north for us, if you like. And as you say, it's already clear that as we build back to whatever a COVID normal is going to look like, it's going to be really critical that we both design for and monitor health, wellbeing and equity outcomes. And I guess I would argue that this building back process brings both risks and opportunities. One of the key opportunities is the growing popular acceptance, I think now, of the linkages between both our social and economic circumstances and our health and wellbeing. And we've known this for a long time, that social and economic disadvantage have serious negative impacts on health and wellbeing. And in Australia, that 10-year life expectancy gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians remains one of the starkest indicators of that. But there's often not a strong public or political appetite to develop economic solutions that fully integrate this understanding. And I think the response to COVID has demonstrated day in and day out these inextricable links between housing, food security, work conditions, with both the economy and then again with health and wellbeing. And we've seen directly that these relationships are cyclic. Better economic conditions directly affecting health outcomes, and better health and wellbeing essential for a more resilient economy. So I guess that I think the key risk is that we're not going to embed these learnings into our future thinking of solutions, that the COVID recession risks widening the educational and employment inequalities, as you've said, with what we know is going to be devastating long-term impacts on physical and mental health for today's youth. But on the flip side, I think the key opportunity is that we've learned how agile and innovative we can actually be when we need to. And I was really heartened to hear the comments before. It's striking for everyone, I think, the levels of cooperation, the levels of unanimity. We can do that if we see that we have a common goal or a common enemy. And I think that it's really on us now to think of things like health, wellbeing and equity as those common goals. And I guess it's a little bit flip, but if you think about, being agile and innovative, really, who would have imagined that within months our gin distilleries would be producing hand sanitizer, that our mental health services could all switch to virtual care delivery, or that each one of us would become an expert in Zoom. I still can't quite believe that. So I guess just to end, I'd really like to underscore the opportunity that you're highlighting with today's forum. It really is possible that we could all work together to build more integrated systems that can actually meet multiple needs, that we can design solutions that deliver on educational, economic, social and health outcomes all at the same time. And I guess just to borrow the Mayor's words, I think we could build a city of yes for all Melburnians, and that would be good for them and good for the city as a whole. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks very much. Leanne, I want to come back to you on this point because obviously Christchurch has been through this example. How did Christchurch go about in your experience? And I know you haven't been mayor for the whole journey, but about making sure that people didn't get left behind.
I think that I was just riveted with Anna's comments, and I think I'll be in touch separately because I think that we have a lot to learn from her. Central government has had a significant role to play in this question because with the development of a wellbeing framework, a living standards framework, and a wellbeing approach, the four wellbeings for the government's first budget after it was elected after the 2017 election, that has offered an opportunity to actually address equity issues, not just in the context of the post-earthquake recovery, but also in the context of other events, the traumatic shootings in Christchurch last year. that was a time where we saw communities coming together in a way that gave expression to a sense of rejection, of hatred and othering, you know, that we've seen as the response in other jurisdictions around the world. And I think that was very much led by an empathetic leader, our Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern. And I've seen that demonstrated against in the post-COVID-19 world as well, during that, where she encapsulated that sense of we were in it together, that we were a team of 5 million. And that really resonated across the country. So, but picking up on that well-being aspect, I mean, I guess that I don't have a magic solution. What it has demonstrated for me, though, is that local government and central government haven't quite aligned the delivery mechanism of what each does in the best possible way. So, for example, if we were seeking to address obesity, I'll take a different health issue, then the fact that we own and run so many recreation facilities and maintain our parks, etc., you know, wouldn't it be better that the government, rather than contributing to the cost of building something, contributed to the cost of people using it, so it was equitably available? With green prescriptions, for example, that could do a lot more for delivering on health and wellbeing outcomes than prescriptions written by a GP. So I'm just saying that if we, and we have seen this as an opportunity, we entered into a partnership with the previous government over a wellbeing project looking at the mental health effects of the earthquake on young people as they were going into their older years, and realised that if we worked in partnership at a community level, then we could get the community itself sort of owning their own future and actually activating their own facility. So instead of the council coming in and running a council facility, the local community runs the local facility in a way that actually activates the community, and that's much more meaningful. And the government matched our funding dollar for dollar. So we're just going through an evaluation of that now, but I'm holding out great hope that that offers the real advance forward that we could see arising out of our experiences.
Thanks, Leanne. And just before I come back to Sally Capp, I just want to bring Peter Hyland from Singapore into the conversation. Peter, you've been leading our business up in Singapore for a number of years now, and just really interested. We are running short on time, so I will ask you to keep it very short. And I know that's very difficult for you with all of your insights, but just really interested to get your perceptions and your thoughts around this concept of building, you know, brands around cities and how important it is to international markets and to international investors, and particularly in the Asian century as we move forward with our place. Oh, we've just had the phones go off. So Peter, if you could take that away. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and hi from Singapore. Been great to listen to the discussion, and great to see Kate's presentation. Matthew, you're right. I think if there's one thing that's going to emerge from the post-pandemic period, is the role of cities. I think globally is going to become even increasingly important, and both the economic, the social, the cultural role of cities. And I know our good friends in Europe and North America are having challenges at the moment going into winter, but they will rebound. There's no doubt about that. And Santiago, my favourite central city garden in the world is in Madrid, so I'm sure it's still looking very beautiful, and a great space to spend and reflect. Some of my favourite days have been spent there. But I think, so as I said, Europe will respond and North America will respond. In our regional context here, I think that I see a golden era potentially ahead for Australia and New Zealand. I think both countries, and particularly the cities like Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington, the Australian cities, despite the challenges, I think if Melbourne has gone through a difficult lockdown, but it's demonstrated that it has managed to come through it and is now positioned to go forward. The future, there is a very strong Asian century coming. There's no doubt about that. China is rebounding at the moment. The retail spend figures and the figures we're seeing come through from China are quite incredible at the moment. Vietnam is booming as an economy. Thailand, despite the current situation of protests, is also strong. Singapore, the flow of capital into Singapore is at record levels, and that flow is going to come through down into Australia. I mean, I think when Australia and New Zealand open up to tourism, they're going to be flooded with tourists. When they open up their migration, I think the question will not be, how many do we want to attract? Where do we put the cap? I think the attraction of Australia and New Zealand as places for people to seek to plan their futures will be even stronger into the future. So from my discussions here and the relationships that, the number of people you talk to in senior positions in government and business, not only in Singapore, but throughout the region, who have been educated in Christchurch or Auckland or Melbourne or Sydney or Brisbane, the relationship is strong. And Santiago, the relationship will continue with Europe. There's no doubt about that, the long history. So Europe will be an attractor. But I think from the Asian perspective, the more that Australia and New Zealand can embrace and build on those relationships, countries like Indonesia, Philippines are looking for support and opportunities, and it'll pay back in spades. I'm sure Singapore, the number of people I talk to in Singapore are just desperate to get down to Australia and New Zealand for a holiday and also to invest some money. So, Matthew, I know it's been a challenging year, 2020, a year like none other, and the world will emerge, a bit bruised and damaged. But really, I do think there's the potential, if we all be prepared and respond accordingly, that it will be potentially another era of quite great opportunities to really create something special. And I'll just finish on one final word. One of the challenges around the world, and I hope that this debate doesn't go forward, is that in some of particularly the developed world, there's been this anti-density push. Singapore is a city of 5 million people. Singapore would fit about 20 times into Greater Sydney or Greater Melbourne. Say hundreds of thousands of times into New Zealand with the same population. Singapore has had 28 deaths from COVID-19. And in Singapore, 4 million, 90% of the population, or over 85% of the population, live in high-rise apartments. So density is not the challenge with COVID. It's about how we manage process and manage the situation. So I hope as city leaders, and I know in Australia there's some discussion about density and the retreat to detached housing, that's fine, but let's not turn our back on some of our inner city areas, what we can achieve with a little bit of good density. And I know Sally's a great advocate for great design and great outcomes. So that's my final point of comment, Matt. So thank you.
Great insights from Singapore, Peter. So Sally Cap, we've reached the end of our session today. And I think it's only fitting that you probably help us end the session with your thoughts and views. And I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty optimistic all of a sudden. I think I might meet you at that pub at 11:59 tonight when it opens up. But I'd just really like to get your final perspective and your thoughts on the future. Yes, we know it's going to be hard, but it doesn't feel too bad at the moment, does it?
No. And it's great to capture so much of that optimism in this report as well, because thank you to Kate and Matt and everyone at Urbis, Nathan, for this report. It tells us that as we look across these cities, we have great foundations from which to build. And yes, COVID has been a terrible setback in 2020 for cities and people and businesses around the world, but those strong foundations are still there. So that positivity should come through now that we are able to look forward with more confidence. Just picking up on some of the themes from the report, that sense of planet, and I know that it's around things like renewable energy and how we all contribute to the greening of our future. But this year has also shown us how interconnected we all are and how the actions of individuals can ripple and have impacts right across this world. And I think that interdependency is something that we should really grab hold of and keep working with as we go forward, because those global relationships and that sense of how we impact each other is something that we can really turn into a positive as well. The other theme was performance that I wanted to touch on. We were one of the fastest growing cities in the world pre-COVID. We just kept hitting new records in terms of population growth and our city economy growth. And when I look back, I realised that that hid a lot around incremental ways forward. It hid a lot around delivery and execution on our strategies because the growth just kept pushing us along. We are now in a situation where performance of how we do work together across levels of government, how we work together across sectors. I mean, we've got to stand side by side with the private sector if we want to see recovery at the pace and strength that we need. It's that sense of performance and a focus on making sure that every single thing we do is done well to create maximum impact. That has to be a focus going forward, and it certainly will be at the City of Melbourne. And I just wanted to finish on people. I mean, cities are about people. We build these cities and all of the underlying strategies to attract people, to make sure that they can be happy, healthy, and that cities are a place where people can realise their full potential and pursue their passions. It's all about people in what we're striving for, but now we know after weeks of lockdown that we can only achieve this by a concerted, combined effort of people working together where every single person's action makes a difference. And that, again, has to be a key theme. And it's just great to see those elements so prominent in this report. So thank you very much. It's been wonderful to Santiago, Leanne, as well as leaders of major cities. Lovely to hear from you today. And thanks again, Matt, Kate and Urbis for putting on this fabulous event.
Terrific. Sally, thank you very much, and great words at the end. Thank you very much. And like we have gone over time, so I will wrap up very quickly, but I do want to thank our very special guests, Leanne Dalziel from Christchurch, Santiago Sora from Madrid, and Sally Cap from Melbourne. Thank you, everybody. Go well, and we'll look forward to catching up again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Well done.
Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.
All the best.
Thanks for inviting Madrid.